The people gathered outside the palace, waiting to see how the story would unfold. Zuri arrived at the palace with her head held high, showing no fear as she stood before the king. The crowd watched in silence, their eyes fixed on the beautiful, fierce woman who had defied even the prince. "Why did you attack my son?" the king demanded, his voice booming through the hall. Zuri stood before the king unflinching, her fierce eyes meeting his without a hint of fear. The villagers gathered in the palace courtyard held their breath, waiting to see how she would answer. The tension was thick in the air, as if the very walls of the palace were bracing themselves for what was to come. The king's voice thundered again. "My son offered you kindness, brought you gifts, and treated you with respect. And yet you struck him. Why, Zuri? Why do you hate men so much? What could possibly justify such violence?" Zuri's jaw tightened. The whispers in the crowd grew louder, but Zuri paid no attention to them. She had spent her life hardening herself, preparing for moments like this. And now, she had no intention of cowering before the king or offering him an apology. She took a deep breath, her voice cold and clear. "I do not hate men," she said, her voice ringing through the hall. "But I will never allow a man to control me, to own me, or to take from me what is not his to have." The king's brow furrowed. "Control? Ownership? No one sought to take anything from you. My son only wanted your affection. Why do you think every gesture of kindness is an attack?" For a moment, Zuri's hardened exterior faltered. A flicker of pain passed through her eyes, but she quickly masked it, straightening her posture. She glanced at the prince who was standing by his father's side, still nursing his bruised face. He looked at her not with anger but with confusion, perhaps even regret. Zuri turned back to the king. "You do not know what I have endured," she said, her voice softer now but no less firm. "You see me as a woman who lashes out, but you do not understand the pain that drives my hand." The king, seeing that there was more to Zuri's story than mere defiance, gestured for her to continue. The crowd was silent, eager to hear what had made this beautiful woman into the fierce warrior they all feared. Zuri closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she spoke again, her voice was tinged with sorrow, her words carrying the weight of years of suffering. "I was once like any other girl in the village. I smiled, I laughed, and I trusted. But that trust was betrayed by the very men who now call me cold and unfeeling. When I was younger, my father arranged for me to marry a man from a neighboring village. He was wealthy, powerful, and respected. First I was excited. I believed that he would love me, protect me, and honor me." Zuri paused, her gaze distant as memories she had tried so hard to bury rose to the surface. "But I was wrong. He didn't love me. He didn't protect me. He saw me as a possession, something to be owned and controlled. From the moment I became his wife, my life was no longer my own. He treated me with cruelty, using his strength to overpower me, to break my spirit. And I let him, for a time." The crowd listened in stunned silence. No one had ever heard this part of Zuri's life, not even the village elders. They had always seen her as distant, cold, and aloof, never imagining the horror she had endured. Zuri's voice grew stronger as she continued, her eyes flashing with the fire that had kept her alive. "But one day I realized that I had the strength to fight back. And I did. I waited until he was drunk, until his guard was down, and then I struck him. For every blow he had dealt me, I returned it tenfold. I left him bruised and bleeding, just as he had left me time and time again. And when he tried to stop me, I fought harder. In that moment I knew that no man would ever lay a hand on me again. No man would ever control me." The king's expression softened as Zuri's story unfolded. He had expected defiance, but not this. He had not expected to see the scars of a woman who had survived far more than any battle could inflict. Zuri raised her chin, her voice steady now. "When I finally left him, I made a vow. I vowed that no man would ever own me, that I would fight to protect my freedom with everything I had. And that is why I have fought every man who has tried to come near me. It is not hatred that drives me. It is the need to survive, to never be powerless again." The prince, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. His face was filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I thought you were cold, but I never imagined that you had endured such pain. I didn't mean to disrespect you." Zuri looked at him, her eyes softened but still guarded. You didn't know because I never told anyone. But now you understand why I cannot allow anyone to get too close." The prince nodded slowly. "I do understand. And I am sorry for what you went through. I will not try to change you or force you to be something you are not." The king, moved by Zuri's story, stood from his throne and approached her. "Zuri, you have suffered greatly, and I cannot pretend to know your pain. But know this, here in this village you are free. No one will force you into anything. You have the right to choose your own path." Zuri met the king's gaze, surprised by his words. She had expected anger, punishment even, but instead she was being offered understanding. The weight of years of fear and anger began to lift from her shoulders, if only a little. The king continued, "I ask only one thing of you. Do not push away those who care for you. There are people in this village who wish to know you, not as a prize to be won but as a person, a woman of strength and courage. You do not have to fight alone." Zuri remained silent for a long moment, considering the king's words. She had spent so many years building walls around her heart, convinced that they were the only thing keeping her safe. But now, for the first time, she wondered if it was possible to let those walls down, even just a little. The prince stepped forward again, his eyes full of sincerity. "I won't ask for your hand, Zuri, but I would like to be your friend if you'll let me. No more gifts, no more expectations, just friendship." Zuri looked at him, studying his face. For the first time in her life, she saw a man who wasn't trying to take something from her, but who was offering something instead. Respect, understanding, and perhaps even trust. It was a foreign concept to her, one she wasn't sure how to accept. Finally, Zuri nodded. "Friendship," she said quietly. "I think I could try that." The prince smiled, and for the first time in as long as anyone could remember, Zuri smiled back. A small, cautious smile, but a smile nonetheless. The king, seeing the tension ease, addressed the crowd. "Let it be known that Zuri has my respect, and no one in this village shall ever lay a hand on her against her will. She is free to choose her own path." The villagers murmured in agreement, their attitudes toward Zuri shifting as they realized the depth of her strength and resilience. No longer would they view her as merely a violent woman to be feared, but as a survivor, a warrior in her own right. Zuri, though still guarded, felt a new sense of peace settling over her. She had shared her story, something she never thought she would do. And in doing so, she had found not only understanding but also the possibility of friendship, of community. It wouldn't be easy, and she knew there would still be battles to fight, both within and without, but for the first time she didn't feel so alone. As she left the palace that day, the sun shining down on her, Zuri walked with her head held high, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to face it, not as the untouchable woman of legend, but as Zuri, a woman of fierce spirit and finally a heart open to the possibility of healing. Zuri walked out of the palace, the whispers of the crowd trailing behind her. For years, she had lived as an enigma, a figure that inspired both fear and admiration. Now, for the first time, people saw her as more than just the fierce warrior who struck down anyone who dared to approach her. They saw her as a woman who had suffered, survived, and continued to fight, both outwardly and inwardly. As she passed through the village streets, heads turned, but the expressions were different this time. The villagers no longer gazed at her with suspicion or fear. There was something softer in their eyes, understanding, perhaps even respect. Zuri felt a shift in the air, a quiet acceptance that she hadn't sought but somehow desperately needed. When she reached the edge of the village, she paused for a moment, taking in the landscape before her. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over the fields and hills in the distance. It was the same village she had always known, but now it felt different, less confining, more open. For so long, Zuri had seen the village as a place that would never understand her. But maybe she had been wrong. Maybe it wasn't the village that had to change, maybe it was her. Her thoughts wandered to the prince. His offer of friendship was unexpected, and she was still unsure how to respond. Zuri had always believed that she didn't need anyone, that strength meant standing alone. But something in the prince's words had struck her deeply. Could she truly allow herself to trust someone again? Could she open her heart, even just a little? As she walked along the dirt path leading to her small home at the outskirts of the village, Zuri mulled over the prince's face, his sincere offer replaying in her mind. Friendship. It was a foreign concept to her. She had spent so much time pushing people away that she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone in, even on a small level. Maybe this was her chance to try. The wind carried the scent of the forest as she neared her house. Zuri paused at the door, her hand resting on the worn wood. She looked back toward the village, where people were beginning to return to their daily routines. Life continued as it always did. But for Zuri, something had shifted. She was no longer the untouchable figure she had made herself out to be. She was a woman with a past, with scars, but also with the possibility of a future. One that she could shape for herself. Inside, her small home was simple, filled with only the bare essentials. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Zuri sat by the fire, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. She had always been a fighter, but she realized now that not all battles were fought with fists. Some battles were fought with the heart, with trust, with forgiveness, with the willingness to be vulnerable. The days that followed were quiet but different. Zuri noticed subtle changes in the way the villagers treated her. They no longer averted their eyes when she passed by. Some even offered her small greetings or nods of acknowledgement. It was strange to her, this newfound connection with the people she had once felt so distant from. One morning, as Zuri was preparing to head into the forest to collect herbs, she heard a knock at her door. It was a sound she hadn't heard in years. Visitors were rare in her life. She hesitated, then opened the door to find the prince standing there, holding a small basket. He smiled awkwardly, clearly unsure of how to proceed. "I brought you some food," he said, offering the basket. "I thought you might like it." Zuri raised an eyebrow but took the basket from him. "Thank you," she said, unsure of what else to say. She wasn't used to receiving kindness without strings attached. The prince shifted on his feet, glancing around. "May I come in? Just for a moment. I won't stay long." Zuri hesitated. Letting someone into her home, her private space, was a big step. But something in his eyes told her he meant no harm. With a nod, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Did you enjoy the story? If so, please like and share the video, drop your comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Thanks for watching and see you on the next.